Well, we're going to begin today's edition of the Startup Central with serial entrepreneur Ronnie Screwvala, the big boss at Upgrad. Why are we featuring Upgrad today? Well, after raising over $100 million from Temasek, the first ever funding that it's gone in for, Upgrad has also gone ahead and announced an acquisition worth 150 crore rupees. Upgrad is an Edtech company primarily in the higher education space. Impartus offers higher education video lessons. Let's go across to Ronnie Screwvala to talk more about this. Thank you so much. It's always a pleasure talking to you, Mr. Screwvala. I'm going to ask you questions on Upgrad and also pick your brains for like a masterclass of sorts when it comes to the startup universe. But let's talk about the news of the day, the 150 crore rupee acquisition. Tell us more.
Well, the 150 crores is part is acquisition cost. The other part is actually the future investment we will do for its growth, number one. Two, overall, Upgrad is an integrated higher education company. And that's what we've lined up the ducks in the last 6 months or so, where we've got test prep, undergrad, and this particular one finishes the ecosystem for us of what we really want to do. And therefore, it's an important one. And I think we'll be tracking for just this acquisition to contribute about 85 crores of revenue just in this current fiscal FY22.
Now, when you're talking about this integration, Mr. Screwvala, can you tell us more? How does it fit in this entire jigsaw puzzle?
Yeah, I mean, it's not a jigsaw puzzle. It's more an integrated company, but I understand the jigsaw puzzle reference to that. So essentially, anything above K-12, which is in the higher education space, from undergrad to test prep, to everything to do with college and SaaS, to the short form learning, to the deep learning for the working professionals, and then, of course, the PhDs. That's pretty much the ecosystem that we've invested in and are creating. And Impartus, therefore, fits in, and now it's being rebranded as Upgrad Campus. It's part of the thing. I think a couple of months back, we acquired the Gate Academy, which is specifically in the test prep of government jobs, which is almost a 45,000 crore market, and that we rechristened as Upgrad Jeet. So that's pretty much what we think is completing the food chain of the entire approach of an integrated for everyone who's above K-12.
Now, Mr. Screwvala, I'd like your expert opinion, please. Yes, Edtech is certainly a buzzword. It has been because of the lockdown. There's been no choice. But 2021 is turning out to be very different from 2020. This time we have no uncertainty. The second wave has been far deadlier than the first wave. And what we didn't have in 2020, inflation. Which is impacting demand. It's forcing a lot of people to reconsider their household budgets and all of that. Compounded perhaps by the screen fatigue, which is also at play. How is an EdTech player like you navigating through all of this?
So look, I mean, higher education has not seen the bump up. And I would say we are very clear that the real upside will come once the pandemic actually stabilizes. That's for the higher ed. I know K-12 may have seen a large hockey stick, both in terms of uptakes because of FOMO guilt of parents, and of course, some of the valuation hype that goes with that. But higher education overall has not seen it because, as you rightly put it, the challenge of people feeling, will I be in a job 3 months or 6 months down the line, does not allow them to commit that kind of resources. What has added fuel to the fire in the last 2 months is obviously almost everyone has had one member of the family in some form touched by the pandemic. And at that stage, to then take out outside of your job, then the welfare of your family, and then doing that has also had its challenges. So I see the uptake really happening when things settle down. And lastly, to your point of therefore, how are we adjusting to the overall situation? I think we've worked very closely where we have a large sales force. And I think the point here is that education is also quite acyclical in the sense that actually when crisis does happen, people do feel that if I really want to get to being in the top 50% of my job profile or companies, it's very important for me to upskill and upgrade. And for the first time, working professionals now have a choice where nobody had that choice of taking a year off from your job, but now they can, to be able to go out and upgrade themselves.
Mr. Screwvala, you went in for your first ever funding round earlier this month when, from Temasek, you raised over $100 million, valuation of what, about $600 million. And that time you did say that you would be using the proceeds from the fundraise for inorganic growth. Lo and behold, within a month, you're talking about 150 crore rupee acquisition. Is this just the first one?
So just to clarify, the total amount that we've raised, which was our first external funding after 5 years, is $120 million from Temasek, just to get that clear. Number two, actually, we've had our ducks in a row well before. So it's not a surprise that just 2 weeks after that, because, identifying acquisitions, finding the right chemistry and the right integration takes almost 4 to 6 months. We have, at this point, lined up at least one more such acquisition that I can't talk about in the short form learning process, which is actually a much more global company than some of the others that we've done here. So I think this year, between our core business, the 4 M&As, and our international expansion to the US, APAC, UK, and the Middle East, we have our hands full.
Mrs. Screwvala, during that announcement from the funding from Temasek, besides M&A strategy, you had also said, not a unicorn yet. Can I ask you when Upgrad is going to become a unicorn, how far you are from becoming a unicorn?
Absolutely none. We've not commented on the valuation on day one. Don't plan to comment on any valuation right now. And the only thing is, I don't think we pat ourselves more on the back when we're a unicorn, before we're a unicorn. It's the finishing post that makes a difference for us. So no comments on valuation.
Okay, I take that, but it's a point I want to expand upon as well. Just the times that we're in, this massive gush of liquidity. Startups will, of course, be very tempted by funding. They may even be chased by funds. There are others who are not able to get funds and are struggling with survival. As someone that this entire ecosystem looks up to, I know it's very generic and, but I still wanted to ask you, for all the youngsters tuning in, first-time entrepreneurs, founders, all of them, employees of new startups, etc., when should one go in for funding? And especially at a time when venture debt is also gaining traction, becoming trendy.
Yeah, maybe I'll answer this last part first. This venture debt is tricky. I think everyone should evaluate venture debt. There is no such free lunch ever. And therefore, please examine that very, very carefully, because it sounds very interesting. And if you start off with venture debt, it's tricky. Second, I think, look, if there is people that are pursuing you and you have an opportunity to get in investors, go for it. I don't think there's a wrong part of it. It's the pursuit and the benchmark that we have, both in terms of, I can't start my business without getting funding, or, there's going to be a valuation at various different stages. And let's be very clear, every entrepreneur, every managing director, every founder is always in their life, whatever happens, consider their companies undervalued. That same will happen with Apple and with Tesla, and can happen with a small company. So that does not mean that every time you hold on to something, and always look at how to optimize that. And the last thing I would say is, it's very onerous to raise funds. I think people today are looking at saying, okay, I'll take in more money, I'll get more diluted. But the fact of the matter is that if you, for example, raise $300 million at whatever the value is, and if that value doesn't come about by the time you actually have a liquidity event, you're going to have zero shareholding in the company. I think a lot of founders are going to find out that the context of at least giving a 1x return to investors is quite onerous and can actually dilute it down to zero. So all I would say is go for it, but you need to know why you're doing it, and not just the badge of honor is not raising funds, and definitely not valuation.
Something else I wanted to ask you. Cash burn versus road to profitability. I understand startups need to look at unit economics. They don't look at, PAT the way we traditionally did for the old economy and all of that. But cash burn versus profitability, where do you stand?
Burn cash, I think, is just a bad word. Profitability, you can have a road to it. I think everyone needs to understand that. And therefore, unit economics is something that's a sensible discussion, because if you're gross margin positive, you will get to profitability. The context of cash burn as a concept that says only if you cash burn can you get for growth, I think, may have been patronized by about 6 or 7 smart but deep-pocketed investors. Sometimes it's hit pay dirt, but 9 out of 10 times it won't. So I think at the end of the day, if you really want to build a tangible business and you don't think in 2 years or 3 years you're going to hype it off, growth, I think, is important. So today, if you have to choose between growth and profitability, I would say 9 out of 10 times, especially in the new economy, people should choose growth as long as there's a road to profitability. The cash burn actually is the one where, and normally you don't burn much. You can do whatever you want in technology, but finally it comes to payroll and what everyone is obsessed about, which is this concept of marketing and the high spends we do on marketing, because we think that attracts the attention and buys us the growth today, but the minute it plateaus. And the third one is discounts. If you're funding discounts, if you're funding marketing from your cash burn, there needs to be a plateauing of that. Otherwise, if the paths don't meet, you're not building a tangible business.
Now, as a very large edtech player, I want to ask you this as well. COVID has, of course, changed our behavior patterns and our mindset. In the post-COVID world, do you think the higher education colleges, universities, institutions will still get the same kind of premium they did pre-COVID? Or has EdTech completely changed that?
I think the institutions that have been created in India, around the world, the double IMs, the double ITs, the triple ITs, etc., they're very coveted. So there are solid brands and they're not going to go away from that perspective. The only difference is going to be that university and offline education was always a very selective process. 100,000 applied and 1,000 got in. The context of online is going to be able to make it a much more eliminated process, where if 100,000 people, 10,000 will be told, you may need to upgrade yourself more before you take this, but 90,000 people can get a choice of a very valid university or a name and take up the course. So I think, yes, forever, this has been redefined in terms of education. At the same time, I don't think it's ever going to replace the phenomenal brand and quality, but that's at the top of the pyramid.
So in a nutshell, you're basically saying it's the Ivy Leagues of this world, the IITs and the IIMs, this part of the world, that will continue to command a premium, will continue to be sought after, maybe not everybody else.
I think so. Absolutely. They should. They build brands over multiple years from that perspective. There will always be people who will seek to have the offline approach because of networking, whatever else. Though I think technology and online now allows for that. But I don't think it's an either or. I think the power is all of them figuring out, how do I take my brand from a very selective one to a much more inclusive one? That's when the penny will drop for even those phenomenal brands that operate both in India and around the world.
Now, you've been around for a couple of years, but because of the pandemic, just look at the number of edtech startups that have been cropping up. Is there room for everybody? Is this getting overcrowded? Or do you think that because the market is so large, it doesn't matter and it's not a winner-take-all market?
I think the top 2 will define each segment. I'm not sure it's a winner-take-all market, but the top 2 will at some stage occupy 70% of the market, and then the balance will be a long tail, number one. Don't forget, this market is either at the top of the pyramid or extremely fragmented. So it's going to take 4 or 5 years for that to consolidate. And third, the market is growing. Like today, everyone thinks the K-12 market is bigger than the higher education market. And I can tell you right here, right now, that the higher education market already is looking and will be much bigger than the K-12 market, because nobody's evaluated that if every working professional needs to upgrade themselves 3 to 4 times in a year, what is that market potential? So I think there's a large growth there. Now, when people look at tech and entering that with a startup of actually catering to a niche, that's really where the challenge will be as we go forward. Because there'll be a lot of niche players, but I think the top 2 in each segment are the ones that's going to actually resonate.
I want to go back to something we were discussing at the start of this interview, and I'm also going to ask this question on behalf of many of those that are in the business of EdTech. You've got inflation, a serious problem of inflation now, and tragedies this time around have been personal. We don't know the uncertainty, the full uncertainty in the job market as well. Do you honestly believe that we will see earmarking for higher education upskilling and all of that. And you are one of the best people to ask this question because you do believe that K-12 is not going to be as large as higher education for EdTech.
As much as I feel that, EdTech has changed the learning experience, not just the education, because education is one where everyone thinks it's a calendar event. You go to school, you go to college. Learning is a much more broad aspect. I think today the pandemic has shown that the mix of wallet share for most people, lower middle class, upper class, whichever way you look at that, not just in India, but in many other emerging markets, I think has changed forever. So I think the prioritization towards saving versus leisure and entertainment versus basic essentials versus health and versus education, I think that wallet share has changed. So while the inflation will be what it is, but the difference in the recategorization of your wallet share and priority of spend has changed forever, specifically in things where you want to insulate against your future, which is education and health. Those market shares and those pocket shares will have changed forever.
We run out of time, Mr. Screwvala. It's always a pleasure talking to you. Thank you so much for joining us on this edition of Startup Central. Congratulations on the M&A, and you've already hinted at another big one coming up. So please do give us time on that day as well when the announcement is made. Well, you learn something new every day, and today I'm learning from the best on live television.